South Africa, the European Union and civil society organizations have met in Pretoria this week to start a policy review process meant to improve access to rights for transgender and intersex people. Let's discuss this then and speak to Executive Director from Gender Dynamics, Liberty Matthys, Deputy Minister for Justice in South Africa, John Jeffrey, and EU Ambassador to South Africa, Dr. Rina Kionka. My thanks to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time tonight. If I could begin with you then, Liberty, about why this is such a crucial conversation to have and a process to undertake.
Certainly, Mbekile. So this couple of days, last 2 days, was really about discussing the human rights advancements for transgender, diverse and intersex persons within the South African context, and with special emphasis on the right to gender self-determination and, of course, bodily autonomy and how that links to the rights to dignity, equality and freedom. And so it's really been a landmark or a milestone moment for us to engage with government, the South African government, and of course, with the support of the EU in being able to dialogue around what future change could look like in order to advance legal gender recognition for us as a community.
And Deputy Minister Jeffrey, let me come to you then. The main focus of this dialogue was on issues around policy. How much of what's come out of here is likely to see the light of day, and where exactly are we lacking in South Africa as far as policy that speaks to the protection of the rights of trans and intersex people?
Yeah, good evening, Mbekile, and good evening, everybody. We all have the right to equality in terms of the Constitution, but when it comes to transgender and intersex people, although they have that right, they have special needs that are different. So there's a number of issues. It's as Liberty has said, it's the issue of gender, what you do with people whose identity is neither male nor female, when all the bureaucratic processes are linked towards one or the other, a binary position. And then it would be other issues relating to intersex people, particularly intersex babies that are born at that really they need the right of bodily autonomy, those young children, and shouldn't have things done to them until they're old enough to actually consent to it. So there's a number of issues where we've got to do more to realize the rights of intersex and transgender people. We don't want this just to be a talk shop. This has actually come after a European Union-sponsored trip in 2019 for government and civil society. It was myself and the Deputy Minister of Home Affairs and then other officials from both departments to Malta and Brussels to look in particular at what the Maltese are doing about this issue, because they're about the most advanced in Europe and I think in the rest of the world.
So, Dr. Rina Kionka, if I can come to you then, as an outsider looking in, you are based in South Africa currently. What has been your assessment of the treatment of trans and intersex people, both as far as policy considerations at government level and the treatment of other citizens of the community?
Good evening to Mbekile and good evening to the watchers. Well, my assessment is very much based on South Africa's own assessment that there is a need that needs to be addressed here. It's a question of the ID cards, ID documents that are not in a position, they're not allowing a kind of non-binary approach for those people who fall in neither category. So the South African government has taken the lead in defining this as a need to be addressed, and we're happy to help out because we do have some. I mean, we have our own issues here as well, but we have made some inroads, and we think an exchange of experiences is a useful thing.
And let me come back to Liberty. Liberty, I mean, when I started the conversation, and I did something that could also be offensive. And just speaking about understanding and the binaries, where I said good evening to you ladies and gentlemen, but the education in the treatment of trans and intersex people begins even at that very level where we often, even without paying attention, misgender and offend people, and that is part of what people like yourself have been calling to have addressed.
100% Mbekile. I think that at the start of the interview, very much wanted to address the issue around not necessarily gendering people and allowing people to, of course, disclose who they are on their own terms. And so a much easier way in being able to speak to a group of people when you don't know what their gender identities are is to say good evening, everyone, as opposed to saying good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So definitely the issue of misgendering, using the incorrect pronouns, dead naming is a huge issue. And I think that is why we need a law that can facilitate an easy, accessible, non-discriminatory, cost-effective way for people to be able to change their gender markers and their names in order to be in alignment with their actual identities within society. I mean, we've been waiting for 18 years, almost 2 decades now, for this particular moment where we can have a policy dialogue with government. And the reason why I'm saying almost 2 decades, because 18 years ago, the Alteration of Sex Description and Sex Status Act 49 of 2003 was passed, which is the legal mechanism through which trans and gender diverse and intersex persons can change the gender particulars with the Department of Home Affairs. And so after this particular time and many, many fights with government, we are very happy to be at this moment where government is actually actively coming to the table to talk about 20 recommendations that we've outlined in a position paper that was launched last year with civil society in being able to address some of the concerns. But in essence, our concerns is about breaching the current discourse when it relates to gender binaries and working beyond the gender binaries, noting that there are people within society that may identify as male, as female, as neither, and of course in ways beyond the current gender binary that is often being referenced. And so one of the key recommendations that we are also making is for an additional category, X unspecified, to be added to the population register in order to recognize people with non-binary gender identities. And I know the government has their own particular ways of thinking about what that could look like. And tomorrow when we do sit down and further discuss the different options that's on the table, I'm really hoping that we'll be able to reach consensus around what that could look like for both an efficient process on the government vantage point as well as for civil society.
And Liberty, let's take that question and put it to the government. Deputy Minister Jeffrey, what are your thoughts on this? Is this something that you can have done in 6 months from now, a year from now, where people have an option where they are not gendered on their identity documents?
Yeah, this is actually an issue with the Department of Home Affairs, and there were senior Home Affairs officials at the 2-day dialogue. They had explained where their policy process is, and they are looking at different options. One of them is an additional marker or number for people who are non-binary or see themselves as non-binary. Another may be to not have a gender marker in our identity document system at all. So they had explained that. They had spoken about the fact that they were hoping for a draft policy on this to be going to Cabinet in the early part of next year. So definitely Home Affairs have done a lot of work on the issue and have been thinking about the thing, and I think they have been engaging with civil society, intersex and transgender organizations. So yeah, we are moving. There is momentum on this.
A headline, Deputy Minister, from this dialogue has been about sensitivity training for public servants. What would that entail?
Well, it's an issue of, I think a lot of people don't understand transgender and intersex people, and they're two different categories anyway, so we can't talk about them interchangeably. And I think it's a pity there isn't intersex person on here, but Liberty can explain about transgender issues. But the issue really is that if somebody is not conforming to what you think their gender is, training in how you deal with that, training in the fact that if somebody is transgender, they've transitioned from, let's say, a man to a woman, you don't keep calling them he. They may not even want to be called she. They may want to be called they, which is gender neutral. But those kinds of issues, and because public servants, public officials are dealing with members of the public who, it's a broad range of people, that there is a need to engage them more in ensuring that they do that they handle things the right way. I think even with this workshop, it was a learning experience for many officials.
Okay.
I mean, what are dead names, for example? The terms that are used. So there's I think a lot of training that's needed, a lot of new information, a lot of new knowledge. Sorry.
So, Liberty, it's one thing for people to just innocently, perhaps, be unaware of the correct language, but it's another when people deliberately misgender and use transphobic language, homophobic language. Is that something that you really think can be addressed through legislation and sensitivity training?
Well, we hope that by taking a very particular policy stance on the matter, that is one strategic step in the right direction to also send a very powerful message out into society to say that trans and gender diverse and intersex persons are human beings that belong just like any other human being that might not be transgender diverse and intersex identifying. And then, of course, to support that, sensitivity training in this particular instance provide an opportunity to shift hearts and minds on the particular matter, or educate people around human rights as it accrues to different persons, regardless of their difference. I mean, as a country, we've struggled with racism, we've struggled with xenophobia, we've struggled with the oppression of cisgender women within society, and these have all been addressed through levels of sensitization training to some degree. I think there's still a lot that we need to do at a community level, and of course, being able to shift people's hearts and minds to steer away from stigma, discrimination, and violence. But that's an ongoing process, and it never really stops. And so I think the policy step that we are talking about now is an important one, but it does need to be supported by active and ongoing sensitivity training.
Dr. Rina Kionka, so you are the EU ambassador to South Africa. How much power do you have, how much influence do you have then to intervene, especially on behalf of marginalized communities such as trans and intersex people, beyond taking part in dialogues and urging for a better respect of their rights? I mean, you look at the continent. Just yesterday in South Africa, we were discussing a story where a South African entertainer, Somizi Mhlongo, basically had to decide against traveling to Zimbabwe or was blocked. However, it happened behind the scenes because there had been a petition started in Zim by religious groupings who said their country was not for gay people.
Yeah, well, the EU does, excuse me, quite a lot on the topic, because for us it's a core value. Equality and non-discrimination are core values for the EU, which is not to say that, as I said before, it's not to say that we've got it all right, but we adopted a strategy, an LGBTIQ strategy last year in the European Union, with a specific focus on trans and intersex individuals. And that's because there's a need. There's a need in Europe, and there's a need around the world as well. One part of that strategy is how we deal, how we talk to partners about that around the world, including South Africa, but more broadly around the world in Africa and other continents. And we raise LGBTI questions early and often in human rights dialogues. We are also, the European Union is the world's largest development partner, and we put quite a lot of funding into supporting groups that that are working on these issues. So there's a fair bit that we can do.
All right, my thanks to you. Quick final question, perhaps. When are we likely to have a solid outcome from this, and what would you like it to be? Let me begin with you then, Liberty.
So I think tomorrow is really going to be a determining moment in terms of what the process is going to look like moving forward. I know that they are proposed, have suggested to us, so hoping to tie that up tomorrow during the course of our engagement. But for us, rather sooner rather than later, because at the moment, the current status quo, Act 49, is problematic with the medical requirements that leads to inaccessibility of the usage of the Act in itself, and particularly for rural-based communities and for peri-urban-based communities, those who are socioeconomically disenfranchised in the country. And so the sooner government can come up with a permanent solution, the better. But in the interim, while we don't have a permanent solution, we are hoping that government would provide some support for transitionary and interim relief for our community members moving forward.
Deputy Minister, final words?
Yeah, look, we've had a 2-day dialogue. Yesterday focused on transgender, the transgender issues mainly. Today was more on intersex. That was the sort of open dialogue, both physically in Pretoria, in Tshwane, and then also online with participants from all over the world, speakers from all over the world. Tomorrow we've got a smaller session with civil society, as Liberty has said, to really concretize the main issues that need to be taken forward, and then we would be engaging government or the rest of other parts of government on these issues. Some of them would relate to legislative amendments, some of them would relate to operating procedures, some of them would relate to training. So there's a range of things. Obviously, legislation takes a bit longer because you've got to consider all the consequences. You may want to pass a law that does A, and it does A, but it also does Z, which you never expected or didn't think about at the time. So that process, and there is a law, as Liberty has spoken about it, on alteration of your sexual status, sex identity rather, and that there's complaints with that law, so we don't want a repeat of that. So we do want to as I said earlier, we've got momentum. We want to keep that momentum and get results.
Dr. Rina, parting shot from you.
Yeah, I mean, we would be happy if there were concrete steps forward that come out of this dialogue tomorrow, where government on the one hand and civil society on the other are discussing recommendations that have come out of a lot of research and a lot of advocacy and a lot of work. So we're interested in concrete policy steps moving forward, and we intend to stay the course with South Africa on this one.
My thanks to you all. Liberty Matese of Gender Dynamics, the Deputy Minister for Justice, John Jeffrey, and EU Ambassador to South Africa, Dr. Rina Kionka. Very good evening to you all. Thank you.